Hello, I'm Mr. Hand, and I would like to talk about knots as metaphors. I'm going to talk about how to connect two loose ends. The challenge with connecting two loose ends is how you connect them. There are some kinds of knots that are less desirable than others. This simple double hitching of knots is commonly done by people trying to combine two kind of chords. And if you don't do it right, you can end up with a knot that really has no binding power. It just slips and slips and slips and is very unreliable. However, if you know what you're doing, you can do a square knot. And a square knot has a pretty shape to it. It has a pattern to it. You can see that these two pieces and these two pieces, it's like two loops that are grabbing each other simultaneously. And the square knot will bind very nicely and will be fairly fast. It's still not perfect, but the challenge here though is that as you bind it, as you pull it tighter and tighter, it gets harder and harder to undo it. And so what often happens after someone throws a square knot, maybe a few extra ones on top just to make sure it's tight, and then it gets bound down, in order to untie the package, they take a knife and cut the rope. And this, in some ways, can be a disrespect to the rope itself, as if it had no value, as if all the work that went into creating this beautiful tool is to be disposed of after it's used once. There is another knot, however, which I find even more attractive, and this is the Carrick bend. And the trick with the Carrick bend is it can be done almost as quickly as a square knot, but it requires skill on the part of the tire. And that you create a loop, and then you throw a piece, the other end, behind the loop. And at this point, you do a very clever bit of weaving. And I'm going to just do it sort of quick here, and we'll throw in a slow motion at the end. But if you set it up in your hand the right way, like that, you can hold the whole ends carefully well. And then the trick is to go over this, under this, over, under, over. And then you can pull it together, sort of separate it out. If you want to take a look at it now, the beauty of the Carrick bend is not only does it require skill, but it's also beautiful. It has a weaving back and forth and back and forth. It's not unlike the square knot, but it has extra points of friction. More of the rope is committed to the bond, to the relationship. And the interesting thing about the Carrick bend is, even though it looks beautiful like this, when you bind it, it actually transforms. Different parts start pulling on each other, and all of a sudden the knot comes through in a form that's different than it started. It's a little unexpected, but as you pull on it, even as you pull on it, you notice it has a little bit of flex in it. In fact, you can pull as hard as you want on a Carrick bend, and it's still very easy at the end of the day to pull it apart and start over again. So it has a lot of respect for both each individual rope, as well as having a lot of function in terms of being flexible. And the only challenge being is it takes a little bit more skill to set up, and you have to also have an appreciation for the parts, as well as sort of the beauty of the weave itself. So that is the Carrick bend. I'm going to do it one last time to show you what happens when you bind it. It turns into a different form, but that form is also strong and flexible. And it's also easy to pull apart. So I prefer the Carrick bend